and all of it coming up with the chat from, I'm delighted to say once again here at the show, journalist and broadcaster Benjamin Butterworth. Welcome back to the show.
Good morning, Julia.
Always good to see you. What do you make of all these price rises? I mean, just to go through them all, I won't go through all the percentages, but is in most of them, I mean, water bills going up by a lot more, but most of it seems to be about sort of 4, 6, 7% or something like that. But realistically, you know, inflation is supposed to be lower than that. So, you know, it's probably going up more than your wages were going up. So we're talking about your gas, electricity. Even a small increase in that is a lot of money because they're around, you know, the £2,000 mark, aren't they? Yeah. Your broadband, your mobile phone, your TV licence going up, your car tax, your water bills, they're going up by the most. Stealth taxes, whereby you're getting dragged into a higher rate of tax than you would have been, not basic rate to higher rate, others. So your marginal income, even if you're on quite average wages, you could be paying the higher rate of tax. Bearing in mind, average wage in this country is 38k. On 50k, after anything after that, you're going to be paying the 40% rate. That tax was not supposed to be for people on that sort of income. Stamp duty, if you're trying to buy or sell a home, your council tax, I mean, you name it, bills are going up. Who do you blame?
Well, I think there are private companies when it comes to the utilities that have taken advantage in recent years. You talked about the water bills. They're going up 26%, which is an extraordinary amount. But look at the profits. On
average, some of them are going up a lot more,
But the profits have gone up 82% since 2018-19. Now, you know, you don't have to be an economist to figure out that they're taking the mick there. And it's all while the service has got poorer, water has got dirtier.
They've not done all the work they were supposed to have done.
And we've not built a reservoir since the early 90s.
And also, they've been paying it's out to shareholders, bonuses to chief executives and directors. Many of these are people who, in foreign companies that own our water companies. I've always found the whole water company privatisation utterly bizarre. I don't have a choice of provider. I live in the London area. I think a fifth of the UK has Thames Water as their provider, or certainly a fifth of England. No, that's it. You know, I've got Thames Water providing my water. I can't go, well, I'm going to go to, you know, Yorkshire Water to get my... That's not an option.
I would definitely choose Yorkshire Water, that's sure, just like my tea. But, you know, this is the thing. Back in 2008, there was this big question of were the banks too big to fail. With our utilities, it feels like the argument is they're too essential to fail, when actually I think a bit more of the market that they claimed to have when they were privatised might do it the world of good, because they continue to provide a poor service and put up costs, and yet there are so few consequences. I know that the regulator for when there are leaks and pipes explode or the water is dirty, it didn't issue a single fine for a whole 12 months because what they would do is they would mediate, and so they'd deal with something far less than the fine. So even the regulator doesn't get them.
I think we could all agree. that they've not done a good job, neither the regulator nor the water companies. But the bills are going up, and people are going to have to pay them out something. Now, if you're on minimum wage, if you're on living wage, which is, you know, not a legal requirement, but a wage that is more likely to help pay your bills, you're seeing your wages going up. And I know a number of teenagers very happy about that, with their weekend jobs getting the full pay, a minimum wage going up. However, there is also concern. As of, I think it's Sunday, April the 6th, the new tax year, national insurance for employers, not only is the threshold at which they start paying national insurance going down to £5,000, a massive extra load of staff, particularly on lower pay, going to have that. Also, the rate going up to, I mean, for bigger employers, it's 15% national insurance rate. These are huge sums of money. An awful lot of companies say, look, we're either not going to hire new people, we're going to lay people off, we're not going to give people wage rises. Even the left-wing think tanks like, you know, the Resolution Foundation are saying, and Institute of Fiscal Studies and others, that it's the poorest people who get hit the hardest when you know, companies cut back, and they are cutting back. Now, we were promised, you know, you were very supportive of this government getting in. They were promising growth. It's their number one priority. We ain't seen any growth. If anything, we are looking like we're heading towards recession. Even if you ignore everything that's going on with tariffs and Trump and all of that, Ukraine war, just in terms of what is going on in this country, what the government is completely in charge of. We're literally doing the opposite of what we should be doing to try and help this country got back on its feet. I
mean, well, there are positive things in the figures, which is
hey, everyone, tune in.
Well, the liberalisation of the ability to build houses is expected to add many billions, but that takes 5 to 10 years. And then there is the fact that I think that this government, one of the reasons they were elected was because people wanted their public services to be fixed. They've been a complete state, the NHS being the most obvious.
And they wanted someone else to pay taxes to cover it.
Well, they wanted them to be fixed, and so Labour raised the money to fix it. I think when it comes to the NHS, 7 million people on a backlog, many of those people are why we have such an unemployment rate, such an out-of-work rate, because people can't do their jobs. And so you have to have a big upfront payment to fix things like the NHS. It's like the potholes. We keep paving them over instead of putting new roads down. Yeah. That's the attitude to the country.
I think to fix a lot of things, there would be an upfront cost. I accept that. I don't see any evidence that any of that is happening.
But that's also why the growth figures have been raised for the end of this Parliament compared to what they were, because they think it will pay off.
I hate to tell you, the growth figures haven't been raised. The forecasts have always been wrong. For all economists accept that all forecasts are all wrong. So I don't think we can trust on this. I really, really don't. But anyway, I want to hear your thoughts. Tell me how it's affecting you. I mean, it's very interesting, actually. And again, this is always where this comes out. Like, single mum, single parents are the ones who are hit the hardest. And then they use an example of a woman who's working part-time when her youngest child is 5 years old, so in full-time school. I'm sorry. Every mum I knew had a 5-year-old, whether they were single or in a couple, worked full-time when they by the time their kids were at school. I really don't understand what's... I've got family members, very good friends who are single parents, in jobs like nursing or other jobs, and they've managed to work full time. So when you're saying, oh, I'm going to be really hit by these bills, poor me because I'm a single mum. Well, A, why is Dad? Why isn't he paying? I'm sorry, where is Dad? Let's always go, why isn't Dad paying for his kid? And second, go and get a full-time job, like everyone else does. Sorry, is it just me? You don't have the privilege. I want to pick my kid up from school. Well, lovely. Well, then... should have married better then, is what I would say to most women.
I actually think that one of the problems we have is that people aren't spending enough time raising their kids. I think that better relationships with kids, more time with them, would do us the world of good.
Yeah, but you can't spend time with them when they're at school.
OK, fair enough.
Between about 8:30 and 3:30, I'm pretty sure you're able to go and get a job.
But most people don't have a job.
Maybe a kid could go into a club after school for an hour, and you can probably manage to do a full-time job.
I was going to say that undermines your point, because if they're at work between those hours, it probably can only be a part-time job.
Except the fact that most mums who do actually pick up their kids from school manage to work.
Well, I mean...
Except, yeah. I'm just talking about facts, Benjamin. I know you on the left don't like those, but I'm just saying.
I had 3 parents. I had my grandparents too, so so we never had that problem.
No, OK. Right, well, look, let's also talk about this latest on two-tier justice. So we had... Two-tier justice in terms of sentencing. The Sentencing Council basically being overruled effectively by the government, saying they were going to bring in legislation. We're going to stop you having basically two-tier guidelines for whether or not you get a pre-sentencing report, which is largely used to provide mitigating factors, i.e. a way of softening the sentence. But it was particularly for ethnic, religious, and I don't know what these are, community minorities, and also people who claim to be trans. Awful lot of men who are sex offenders suddenly miraculously discover that actually they're women. Isn't that funny? Just complete coincidence. It must be the shock of the system. It's a shock of going into that police cell that makes them realise this. But they basically were threatened by Shabana Mahmood, the Justice Secretary, and again, she and the previous Justice Secretary, now Robert Jenrick, now he's the Shadow Justice Secretary. Everyone's claiming, they didn't know anything about this. I mean, even though their advisors were in the meetings.
Yeah.
Sentencing Council, still all those judges and senior figures, all quite happily still in their jobs, despite the fact they were basically pushing in my view, blatantly, openly racist, illegal sentencing guidelines. We also now know we've got two-tier police race guidelines. Now, we did actually learn about these last week, but they're raised in the Commons yesterday. And this is basically officers being told to treat black and white suspects differently. Labour has all said there's nothing in the plan suggesting police should give preferential treatment to black people compared to white people. But the report basically said their commitment is to racial equity. And they said that did not mean treating everyone the same or being colourblind. They called for equality of policing outcomes for different ethnic groups by ending the racial disparity in the, quote, likelihood of people being criminalised. And they want officers to consider cultural impact and community trauma when using their powers. What the heck is that?
Well, I think there is a lot of evidence that black people are disproportionately arrested or questioned by police. Yeah, of course there is. We know that the chances of being arrested for being in possession of cannabis are 6 times higher for black people compared with white people. Now, that's got something to do with the choices police are making when they arrest them.
Is it not also come to do with the demographics of where the police are patrolling, and black people, largely Afro-Caribbean people, are more likely to be living in the cities where police are more likely to be dealing with drug problems? So, funnily enough, they're not patrolling the streets of a village in Dorset where it's likely to be more white people. If you look to the demographics of the people who live in those inner city areas, I think those figures will be very, very different in terms of a comparison.
I think there's a lot of distrust from black communities, especially in places like London, and to take that into perspective of how you police is important, because actually, in the nature of policing that we have in this country, policing by consent, a lot of information comes from the community providing it to the police.
Well, they often don't provide it to the police.
And if that breaks down, then policing is inefficient.
No doubt at all. Absolutely no doubt at all. We have got some racist police officers, we've had issues, and certainly in the past. I like to think things are getting better. It will never be perfect. I accept that. If I were a young black man living in an inner city right now, do you know who I'd most distrust? Another young black man, because they're the person who are most at risk to me in terms of my chances of being beaten up, being stabbed, being mugged, being robbed, or anything else.
A friend of mine who used to be a Metropolitan Police officer told me a story of how his boss once told them to go and check some people in a car because saying they could smell cannabis, and he knew full well they couldn't smell cannabis. It was a car full of black people, and they just
using it as an excuse.
They were. They wanted to really reach their arrest targets, and they knew that was the easiest way to do it. And he was horrified. I was shocked, but when you think about it, should it be shocking?
And they should be the officers should be sacked who ordered that, if that was the case.
I've read stories in the news where a barrister, a black barrister who drives a very nice BMW, told of how he was repeatedly stopped in his car, and of course the police officers would get the shock of their lives because he knows the law so well, but they're not doing that to a white person. No,
I'm fully aware. I'm a white middle-class woman. I've never been stopped by the police driving a Tiguan. I don't think I look like a drug dealer. And again, the idea that if a young black man or an older black man is driving a fancy car, they must be up to something. That is racism through and through, 100%. However, when we look at the two-tier justice and all the talk we've had on the sentencing guidelines, for instance, about black people are less likely are more likely to have longer sentences, not more likely to be sentenced to prison, but more likely to get longer sentences. And one of the reasons for that is because they're less likely to plead guilty at any point or early enough than other groups. And therefore you get a longer sentence. And also when people say for the same crimes, often when you're comparing the actual figures, there are only 12 different categories. They'll include, assault on the person. Now, that will include a vast array of different crimes, from, someone sort of slapping someone to someone stabbing somebody or beating them up. And so you cannot make a direct comparison. When we look at the violence, we look at the statistics, you look at, in many areas, and you look at who is getting hurt and who is perpetrating the crimes. I'm afraid particularly the Afro-Caribbean community, certainly in London, is vastly overrepresented in certain categories of crime. And those are categories of crime that most people, black and white, are concerned about and want dealt harshly. And so they're dealing out these crimes. If you want to know the group, by the way, the ethnic group that is most likely to get the tougher sentences, Chinese.
Really?
Yeah,
I don't think Chinese
I know.
are
I look at the actual statistics and read the actual reports even by the woke sort of anti-prison campaign groups. If you actually look at the official statistics, Chinese and others, and it's like, oh, OK, but what crimes are they committing?
Yeah, I wonder whether that's because there are so few criminals and maybe it tends to be a certain extremity of crime.
Well, again, there's always an excuse when it's not. We always have to focus on it being black people. But the key thing is everyone should be treated equally. And when people talk about equity, what they mean is having the same outcome. But you shouldn't have the same outcome if people have done different things.
But you should have it's about, when it talk about outcome, it means in terms of the way that they deal with the police, that it is equal. But I think it would be complete. I think it's right that the police thinks about the fact of how they treat different racial groups, because clearly there's a problem at the moment. But when it comes to the sentencing, I think the Justice Secretary is totally right. And she wrote a letter to the Sentencing Council last week saying, look, I'm a Muslim woman and this is not OK. I don't want to be treated differently to my white colleagues.
Can I point out, though, I'm not a Muslim woman. I'm a white, straight woman. I only get one category there, which is... No, but what you are shouldn't have any bearing on whether your opinion matters more or how you're treated. You should be treated... someone growing up, say, with a drug addict father who's in and out of jail who sort of told you to go and carry the drugs.
That's me.
That's a relevant factor, but it's got sod all to do with whether or not you're black or white or brown.
Well, as the child of a drug dealer father
exactly.
and a drug dealer mother, I tell you what, I never committed a crime. I worked harder and went to school. But, you know,
good for you.
The reason that's possible is when people have role models, and maybe some of the part in African background, in Caribbean background, is black Caribbean is a particularly problematic background. There's lots of crime rates. Maybe they need good role models and better schools.
Dads.
Yes.
Dads, that's what they need. 45% of children growing up in Caribbean homes, dad isn't in their home. In families from African heritage, not the same issue. Don't have any of the same crime rates. There's, you know, if you look at the different crime rates between different communities, most of it goes down to family unit. Actually, it's extraordinary. It's far more to do with family, demographics, than it is to do with anything to do with race. Anyway, I want to we're way over time, but I desperately want to love to hear your thoughts on all of this, by the way. Of course, get in touch, 0344 499 1000. I just want to get to Marine Le Pen. We'll talk about it a little bit later, but just briefly. Marine Le Pen banned from standing in the next French presidential election. That's 2027. She was going to go for a fourth attempt. She's odds-on favourite. Each time she's got more and more votes. We don't know who she'd be running against. It won't be Emmanuel Macron. But her party is the biggest single party national rally in France in the parliamentary elections. She was basically convicted of embezzlement of EU funds. We're not talking about going off and buying designer handbags. We're talking about using the funds from the EU to fund her party. Not allowed, no question, not allowed, funding her party back in France. However, everyone I've spoken to who worked in the EU said everyone does this. They've chosen to prosecute her. She's been banned from standing elections. We had Mike Amesbury, the Labour MP, convicted on camera, by the way, of repeatedly punching a constituent to the ground, repeatedly punching him in the face to the extent that people had to pull him off because that man could have died. He resigned from his seat. There is going to be a by-election. He's allowed to stand. Now, the Labour Party don't want him to stand. He has every right to stand as an independent. How can somebody be banned from running in an election just because of a criminal conviction? Surely that should be something that should be up to the general public, up to the voters.
Well, to quote Donald Trump, lock her up. I think that's what I think of this. I mean, look, you know, there is a difference here, though, which is, and that's not to defend Mike Amesbury, but to say that if your crime is about exploiting the political system, then should the political system not have consequences? And she was taking money, public money, from the EU Parliament, from part of the political system, and funneling it to fuel her own staff. And also, it's questionable about whether she benefited or the Le Pen family benefited, because some of the Le Pen family were being paid with this money.
But for jobs.
Yes, but
they weren't like getting it in their personal bank account. It was like, here you go.
Well, they were getting it in their personal bank account through a job.
Through pay.
And the party, the National Rally, was in, I think, £15 million equivalent of debt. So it couldn't afford its costs at the time it was doing this. So it's highly dubious. And many Le Pen family members probably wouldn't have had jobs.
It's a legitimate prosecution. However, they don't prosecute others. And when you talk, like you say, Christine Lagarde, OK, she's, you know, boss of the IMF. She's a French finance minister. She, in 2016, was found guilty of negligence over public funds that went to a private company. She was found guilty of that. Wasn't even handed a punishment of any sort whatsoever. Oh, no, reaffirmed as the boss of the IMF. French government said they've got every faith in her. Why are the rules so different? And why are so many people so upset about what happened to the Romanian opposition leader? Because when he's banned from standing. When everyone's upset about what's happened in Turkey. Oh, but it's Marine Le Pen. There's so obviously a political bias, dimension to this. I think, though, this is going to help her party. I think there'll be a lot of people who say, we've seen the socialist leaders and others, people on the far left saying, this is such an outrage that they are horrified by it.
Well, let's just be clear, though. She was using public money illegally to fund
she got a criminal conviction.
To fund her attempt to be the French president. That, for me, is directly affecting how she was, the chance of her becoming president, and therefore
Shouldn't that be up to the voters?
The most appropriate punishment should be that you cannot be the French president.
The most appropriate
so long as you're illegally using that money.
If it's a jail sentence or if it's a fine or whatever it is, being tagged, that's fine. That's the sentence. That's the sentence. She's going to appeal. But banning her from running for public office, everyone should be allowed to run for public office. That's part of democracy.
But it's like in the Romanian case where he was found to have, I think the accusation was Russian interference to help him in the popularity, money to try and win that election. If you are trying to skew the grounds on which an election is functioning, then you should have a consequence with that election. That's the difference in Le Pen.
Well, you do have a consequence. If the
money.
voters don't like you because of that, then they won't vote for you.
Right, but I mean, I hate to go straight to Hitler, but if you push if you push propaganda out to distort how people can read the situation, then the voters don't have. The whole point is that the voters aren't getting
so you just ban
fair
people.
Instruction.
Do you think these bans? Do you think they work well?
We have it in this country. If you're declared bankrupt, you're banned from running for election.
You are, actually. That's
which is
a good
ridiculous.
point. I think until you redeem the bankruptcy, aren't you?
I don't know, but the MP for Windsor, I think, was banned because his business had gone under, which is totally ridiculous in my opinion. I think that, there's good grounds for it, which is that they fear that, you might be at risk of exploitation with your finances. I don't think we should have that law, but it's still in the case. You can be banned in this country.
Okay, fair point.